This is week 4 of the college baseball rankings. Let's get into it. At number 1, I think it's pretty easy to say LSU holds that spot. They went 5-0, didn't really face much good competition, but at a 15-1 record, they have just proved so far this year that they are the top dogs.
Yeah, I mean, besides their loss to Iowa, not many of their games have even really been close. They are just 10-run ruling pretty much everyone they face at this point. And yeah, like you said, they're just clearly the best team in college baseball up to this point.
Definitely. After that, it's kind of up to debate which teams are in the running. And a lot of those teams could be SEC, with Wake Forest and Stanford not having the best weeks, and right behind them, just chasing them down, are a bunch of SEC schools. So for me personally, I put Arkansas in that 2 spot. I just think out of all the teams right there, they had the best week overall, going against Army midweek, which is a fine win, but then sweeping Louisiana Tech is a pretty decent series, I think, just because Louisiana Tech has been pretty decent as of recent past few years, and they even took a game against Ole Miss this year, so I think it's reasonable to think that that was a pretty good weekend series.
Yeah, no, certainly impressive sweep for them over LA Tech, like you said, which has been a solid program over the last few years. In the 2 spot, I actually left Wake Forest there, even though they were 2-2 on the week. They still won the series overall, which is most important thing at the end of the week. These were their first 2 losses of the season. Not overly concerned about it as long as they continue to win these weekend series. This is their first little slip up, and it wasn't really that bad of a slip up, so I kept them in the 2 spot here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They lost to Coastal Carolina at Coastal Carolina during the midweek, and then we're also at Duke. So it's definitely reasonable to think 2-2 is not a bad week for sure. I just think the SEC teams are pretty much right on the tail of Wake Forest. If that's the case, it's kind of LSU, a little gap, and then just a bunch of teams right after. I think.
For sure.
Sweet. So we'll go LSU, then Wake Forest, and then I think Arkansas kind of deserves that spot, but I think that's also up for debate with other SEC schools. So what are you thinking for the 3 spot?
For the 3 spot, I could agree with Arkansas there. I do think that sweep over Louisiana Tech is pretty impressive. Uh, Tennessee dropped that midweek to Boston College. Not overly concerned about it. I think Tennessee has looked really good outside of that first weekend, but a lot of these teams in this top 8 or so haven't really had slip ups. And so I'm fine with putting Arkansas here. And I think Tennessee's right behind them still.
Yeah, it's tough to have Tennessee kind of stay in the same spot with other teams dropping back, but I think that their weekend wasn't against the best opponent, Morehead State, even though they swept them. Losing to Boston College midweek isn't the best look. I mean, Boston College had probably the best week in college baseball, so it's tough to put that past them. But yeah, I think Arkansas should probably go in that 3 spot, and then Tennessee right after them. All right, at number 5, I had Ole Miss jumping up 1 spot, went 4-0, beat Southern Miss midweek, and then swept Purdue on the weekend. So at 14-2 now, they are just looking absolutely dominant, and have shown that they deserve to be in the top 5, and finally a spot opened up for them to grab it.
Yeah, in this 5, 6, 7, 8 range here, I just moved up the group of Ole Miss, Louisville, Vandy, and Florida, all up 1 spot. These are all just teams that really haven't had slip ups up to this point. Each of these teams had 4+ wins on the week. And then I slotted Stanford at 9 right behind them after their very bad week, going 1-3 with the midweek loss and then the series loss to USC, which looks like they could be trending in a positive direction, but has not been one of the better programs in the Pac 12 for a long time now. So that was a tough loss for them.
Yeah, I did something similar. I get that Stanford, kind of with the record at 10-5 overall, have not looked the most impressive. Their offense hasn't been clicking on all cylinders, and their pitching staff definitely has some question marks. I dropped them to 7 with Ole Miss and Louisville right in front of them. I just think their record is pretty similar to Vandy, even though Vandy might have faced a little bit better competition earlier in the season. I don't think it was by far that much better. And while they had a good record this week, the offense has not looked the best. And I think there is kind of a gap between those top six teams, let's say, and I guess now Stanford kind of drops right after that. And then also like Vandy and Florida are kind of in a grouping with Stanford, I think. So I'm not exactly sure how to rank that kind of range, but I think definitely Ole Miss and Louisville are above Stanford. But after that, it's a bit of a question mark for me.
Yeah, I think I gave Vandy and Florida the nod over Stanford just because they do have solid series wins, at least one of them, with Vandy having the series win over UCLA and then Florida with the series win over Miami. I think both of those are solid series wins, and Stanford doesn't really have something like that on the resume at this point. As talented as they are, they just haven't performed as well as a lot of these top 8 teams so far.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable for sure. We saw kind of the similar trend last year with Stanford. They didn't have the best early of the year and then picked up a lot of momentum late. So I think that's a good place to put them at number 9, like your reasoning there. So we'll go with your list and then jump on to number 10 right after. At number 10, we're going back to the SEC for me. I left Texas A&M in that spot. They went 5-0 against not amazing competition, but did the job. Can't really move them up or down for that, as there were no real positions to be gained this week.
Yeah, I went back and forth on whether I wanted to leave Texas A&M in this spot or not, and I ended up having Virginia jump them into the 10 spot here. But it was one I went back and forth on for a while. I just think Virginia has dominated up to this point. They hadn't played any good competition, so we weren't really sure what that meant, but they had a pretty dominant series win over North Carolina this weekend, and they look like the real deal. So I put them up in this 10 spot, but I'm also fine with leaving Texas A&M there because they did go 5-0 on the week, and it was one I was just flip-flopping back and forth for a while.
Yeah, I put Virginia right behind them at 11, jumping up a few spots. I just don't think you can really drop a team for going 5-0 and looking pretty good in that instance, even if like a team like Virginia finally proved that they are worthy of being higher in the rankings. If a spot doesn't open up, like Texas A&M kind of didn't give that leeway, you can't really jump them for me personally. So yeah, I just went Texas A&M 10 and then Virginia up to 11.
Yeah, I'm fine with doing that.
Then after in the 12 spot, similar to Texas A&M, I had East Carolina staying in the same position, going 5-0, not facing amazing teams, but yeah, went 5-0, so took care of their business.
Yeah, and not really sure how Liberty's going to look at the end of this year, but they have been a solid program as of late. So it's not terrible competition, but like you mentioned, they just took care of business, and I also left them here in this 12 spot.
Sweet. And right after that, at 13, I had UCLA jumping up 1, had a pretty good weekend, went 3-1 overall, beat Long Beach State, who has been a pretty good team on the West Coast the past few years, and then won the series at Oregon. They had a, like I mentioned, tough midweek and a big series win after losing the first game in the set. So was able to come back and looked dominant kind of the next 2 days besides a few innings.
Yeah, I also moved UCLA up into this spot. Very solid week for them, especially winning that type of series on the road. Yeah, just impressive week for them, and they continue to play well even in that series loss to Vandy. They looked good.
At 14, I dropped Virginia Tech down 3 spots, I believe. They went 3-2, so still had a winning record over the weekend. So didn't think that they could really drop too far back. They did lose their weekend series against Boston College, but like we kind of mentioned earlier, Boston College is a team to kind of look out for in the future. They could definitely be either in the rankings this week or just outside. I think there definitely is a conversation there to be had, and yeah, they proved that they're definitely in contention for something in the ACC, and just Virginia Tech didn't look the best, but still had a winning record.
Yeah, this is exactly where I had them dropping as well. Like you mentioned, lose the weekend series, you're likely going to be dropping. but they did have a winning record on the week, so you can't drop them too far. And yeah, this is where I had them slotted. And then I had OK State coming right behind them at the 15 spot after a 6-0 week. So a lot of games. They didn't play great competition, but it's one of those teams we mentioned earlier on that would move up the rankings if they just continue to win. And that's what they've been doing. And I think they're looking better and had them slotted in this 15 spot.
Yep, I had them in the exact same spot as well. They did face 2 games against Arizona State, who, I mean, it's kind of early to tell, but they're still usually decent competition. So there is that. It was a 4-game sweep against Utah Tech, which is definitely something that they probably should have done, and they did. So 6-0 really boosts the record there, and definitely jumping up to 15 for me as well. Then at 16, I put Florida State in there. They're kind of yo-yoing back and forth, it seems like, the past few weeks. They did have a good weekend, though, going 2-1 against Pitt. They did their job. They kind of proved that they deserve to still be ranked after having a little bit of a rough week last week. So, yeah, I think 16 is kind of the spot for them.
Yeah, I was going back and forth on where to put them in this range here. I think it's kind of a 3-man race here between North Carolina, TCU, and Florida State for me. And I do agree with Florida State going up here, especially since they have that head-to-head series win against TCU at TCU. I think that's the main point here is them having that series win, and I think that's what puts them in the 16 spot, and followed by TCU for me, and then North Carolina in the 18 spot.
Interesting. So this is where I have a little bit of discrepancy from what you've been saying. For the most part, before this ranking, we have kind of gone the same direction, but I think North Carolina, especially, I mean, TCU has faced tough competition all year round so far. It's kind of tough to drop them too far back, but definitely having Florida State win the series against them is definitely a reason to kind of look further like past a team like TCU. But UNC especially, even though they've had a lot of like competitive games against good teams, they just have not won a series against good competition yet so far this season. So teams like TCU, they have. I mean, obviously the record's a little bit worse for TCU, still not having 10 wins yet, while UNC is up to 12 already. But UNC lost both their games to East Carolina. They lost the series to Virginia. So it's just not looking great competition-wise that they're winning the games they should win, but they're not winning the other games. So I dropped them to 19 and 20 respectively, with Texas Tech and South Carolina jumping above them there just because they have looked relatively decent. It seems like South Carolina just keeps getting the job done and is just going to keep climbing up the rankings because of that. But yeah, after kind of that Texas Tech is where it drops off a little bit for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I did have Texas Tech moving up a bit this week as well. I do think that was a solid series win over Iowa, and I do think they've looked competitive against the high end competition they've played up to this point. Like you mentioned with North Carolina, it's kind of hard to judge them because we think they're a good team. They just haven't won games against that tough competition yet, like you said. They've been competitive, but just haven't pulled out the wins. So it's really hard to judge where they fall in this sort of ranking.
Yeah, I mean, with conference play ahead of them, the whole season is just there for the taking, essentially. But they haven't shown quite enough yet for me to keep them kind of that high up in like that 15 to 18 range. So I dropped them a little bit further back. But they just have a lot of opportunities to make up for that in the ACC with so many ranked teams in there and good competition pretty much every week. So I don't think it's kind of a time to worry, but they just haven't really proven that they can beat the good teams consistently for me to warrant them kind of ahead of a team like Texas Tech and South Carolina, where Texas Tech beat Iowa, who was a team probably like the 26th team or 27th team last week, just outside the top 25 team that we were like, all right, if they beat Texas Tech, they probably like switch spots with them, but Texas Tech did the job. I think they deserve to jump up the rankings a decent amount. And with South Carolina, still pretty much haven't faced anybody, but with SEC play ahead of them, I mean, we'll really see what South Carolina is made out of. They might crumble right off the start, but if they get wins, they definitely deserve to be in the top 15 and warrant the spot where I believe that they're at right now.
Yeah, so who do you have in the 17 spot here?
So I put Texas Tech jumping all the way up just because they had a good series win. Their record is kind of starting to show that they're a proven team so far. And even though South Carolina has a better record, they just don't have the quality wins that Texas Tech has so far.
Yeah, I like Texas Tech there. For me personally, I still like North Carolina and TCU over South Carolina just because South Carolina hasn't faced the competition yet. But we can see how we want to slot these three after Texas Tech.
Yeah, I think what you said there is fair with especially South Carolina. I mean, we'll see this week and the weeks coming what they're made out of. So I think we can have them a little bit back farther, and they'll be jumping teams in a heartbeat if they can beat like top teams.
Yeah, definitely one of those teams where as soon as they have a solid series win, you could see them jumping up very quickly just because they do have the record to back up that.
Yep, sweet. All right, so Florida State at 16, and then 17 Texas Tech, North Carolina at 18, TCU 20, or yeah, TCU 19, and then South Carolina 20. And then for the last 5 spots in our ranking, I had a newcomer join in at 21 with Campbell jumping in. They were one of the teams just outside the top 25 last week, and they went 4-0, going to Tulane and then going to App State, and just having a solid record at 12-2 overall, and has proven that they're a mid-major to be scared about.
Yeah, definitely a good week from Campbell. I also had them jumping into the rankings. I had them at the 23 spot in mine. I just wasn't sure if I should jump them over NC State and Southern Miss, who two teams that stayed in the rankings with just so weeks. NC State losing the series to Miami, but going 2-2 on the week, and then Southern Miss went 2-1 in their weekend series and lost a midweek as well. So just average weeks from both of those teams. Yeah, I think you can put Campbell up there. I think I would have NC State and Southern Miss right behind them, if so, before any other newcomers.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we're gonna have a pretty different last 5 spots of the rankings here because I took out Southern Miss. I think they went 2-2 and they faced tough midweek competition with also a relatively decent weekend win against Valpo, winning the series and facing Ole Miss at Ole Miss during the midweek. But I don't know. It just seems like they've been inconsistent up and down. And for me personally, I had them like at that 26, 27 spot, dropping just back out of the rankings, but literally right there, they can taste it. And NC State, I dropped a little further back just because this was their first time facing good competition, and they lost the series to Miami. Even though it was at Miami, it's the first competition they've really faced. Going 2-2 is fine, I guess, but we really haven't seen them prove anything. Similar to what I said about North Carolina, it's just tough to keep them as like only dropping back a few spots when they really haven't faced anybody, and that was the reason why they were jumping up, was because look, they're just beating up on teams that they definitely should easily win against, and yeah, they're doing that, but they're not kind of challenging themselves. And now that conference play has started, the challenges are being thrown their way, and they're kind of failing those tests. At least the first one, the first hurdle, they tripped over. But yeah, for me, I just had NC State at 23. And then, like I said, Southern Miss being out, with Oregon State hanging on by their skin of their teeth there at 25. But yeah, we can get into what you think other newcomers we think we can add in there, and discuss that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, so I had NC State followed up by, or we could have Campbell there as well, but I had Campbell, NC State, Southern Miss in this mix, and then my two other newcomers were UCSB, Santa Barbara, and then Boston College. Boston College, another one of those teams where Not really sure exactly what to think, but they did just have arguably the best week in college baseball, and they do have a good record. They'll have to continue to prove it in ACC play, but this was one of the most impressive weeks someone has put together this season, and so I gave them the nod for that. And then Santa Barbara has just been consistent throughout the year so far, consistently winning games and have done so against decent competition.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also had UCSB in the top 25 jumping into number 22. But a team that I didn't hear you mention is Alabama and Oregon State. I'm guessing both of those teams are out in your top 25. I think Oregon State is kind of reasonable to take out. They did go 2-2 facing USD, winning that in the midweek, which is seems like they could be a decent team, and them losing their first Pac-12 series against Washington State at home, which is not the best look for sure. But definitely, I think Alabama deserves to stay in, even though they did lose their weekend series to Columbia. They still ended up going 3-2 on the week, so I don't think you can really drop a team that we had at the 20 spot all the way out of it, just because they had a winning record overall in the end.
Yeah, my reasoning for Alabama was similar to your drop on NC State, whereas the only reason they were up that high is just they were continuing to win games and doing so against lesser competition. And then they lose a weekend series to Columbia, which is not that talented of a squad compared to NC State, who was losing a series on the road in Miami. I just think there's different levels to that. And I think that was a big knock on Alabama's resume, losing a series like that without any quality wins up to this point. And so I feel like multiple other teams at this back end in the 23 to 30 range, say in these rankings, has proven a little more than Alabama has.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. It's really tough at the back end here. I think there are a lot of teams that kind of don't necessarily deserve to jump in. That if we had kind of more teams right outside the top 25, could easily take advantage of all these teams going down. But I personally think would love to see like another week from Boston College there. UCSB has been right outside the top 25 for a while. Same with Campbell. Both those mid-major schools just kind of put together a good season, and this is like kind of the first week that Boston College has jumped on a lot of people's radars, even though their record is great and they now are like number one in RPI, if whatever you take that with like a grain of salt, just because it's so early in the season. But yeah, I mean, beating Tennessee at Tennessee and then going to Virginia Tech and winning the series is amazing. But it's kind of the first time we've been hearing about it, and I'd love to like people weren't super high on Boston College before the season, and I still think you kind of have to take into expectations like what preseason kind of people thought about teams at this point. And I mean, I think they're like the 26th team, but we could definitely like move a team at the back end. I just don't think necessarily we can move Alabama out like completely if NC State is still in. I think it's fine to have like a little gap between the two teams, but I don't think we can fully take them out for a team that I think Campbell has a pretty similar record. They've beaten maybe a few better teams than Alabama have, but their record is like essentially the same. So I don't know if Alabama really warrants getting fully dropped out of the rankings yet.
Yeah, let's start with the teams that we both
Okay,
agree on
so
being
we
in.
both have Campbell in. We both have
Yep,
UCSB in. We both have NC State. Those are the
yep,
three teams.
yep.
So I guess we can order those three in whatever way we want.
Let's
I had
go
Campbell
Campbell first.
21. Okay,
Yep.
sweet. Have him jump up to 21. Newcomer. After that, I had UCSB just because I thought NC State deserved to drop fourth, like further back than just like a few spots for losing their like first competitive weekend.
Yeah, we can go with Santa Barbara there, and then
Cool. And
NC
then
State
NC
has
State.
a big series coming up against Virginia, so we'll see if how they
We'll see
look.
what they're made of. Yeah.
Yep.
Feel like that's I mean with conference play starting, that's kind of how it is with all like the teams at the back end of the top 25. It's like they have
Yeah,
all the
and then
opportunity ahead of them, but could easily be knocked out in an instant with teams like right on the outside of the top 25. But
yeah, and then just with the way We've been talking. I think you have Alabama, Oregon State. Is that right?
Yeah, those are my final two, but I'm not opposed to jumping in like a Boston College. I do think Southern Miss
Yeah,
probably shouldn't be in anymore for at least a week. I think they're like 26, 27. I mean, obviously, we haven't even mentioned UC Irvine. They went 1-2 on the week, losing to LMU midweek and then going 1-1 at Gonzaga, who now has, I think, 2 wins overall. So Gonzaga has faced an extremely tough schedule to start the year, but they just haven't been able to do anything. And they finally got 1 win against a decent team, but that unfortunately would knock UC Irvine out of the top 25. And their only win this week was against Gonzaga, and it wasn't extras. So even that was tough to come by.
I don't know. This is tough because I don't want to drop Southern Miss out.
We have to play rock paper scissors for what team drops out. Southern Miss or you have Oregon State out, Alabama also out, right? And then
Yeah,
yeah, and then you have Boston College and Southern Miss in. So we have two different ways to resolve this. Yeah, Boston College and Southern Miss are my two teams just out, 26 and 27, and Alabama and Oregon State are just on the other side of that. So it's a doozy. This is the first week we've had pretty opposing opinions here about somewhere in the top 25. The other ones have been pretty easy to solve, but this one I feel like I don't know. It's finally getting difficult at this point in the season.
yeah. I think my suggestion would be keeping Oregon State in because they have the 2 wins over Santa Barbara
Right.
as well.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what my reasoning was with Oregon State. It's like, yeah, they had a rough week at home against kind of a Pac 12 team that hasn't been very good the past few years, but their record is showing that they could be on a upward trajectory with Washington State there. And Oregon State has faced relatively decent competition. It hasn't been like just nobodies that we saw with like a team like Alabama. So yeah, I think that's reasonable to keep Alabama or to push Alabama out and keep Oregon State in, and then it's up to you to decide which team, Southern Miss or Boston College, you want to put in because I didn't have either of them in.
Yeah, I think I would. I think I'd go with Southern Miss just because I feel like they have. I feel like they just have
Okay,
they have
and
some quality series wins. So
would you go Oregon State and then Southern Miss?
yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, just leave it like in the same order that we had them last week, just dropping them
Yeah.
back one spot.
Yep.
Sweet. All right, I guess that solves that, and then we have Alabama and Boston College right on the outside of the top 25. And then right after that, I think we can give a shout to Georgia and Georgia Tech. Those were the teams that I think are also kind of the next in line there, have good records, have kind of proved it against decent teams. At least Georgia has because they beat Georgia Tech last week, I believe. And then yeah, they're both put together pretty good seasons, and we'll see how it goes with their next week with conference play getting started.
Yeah. Yeah. The other team I would add in there as well is Florida Gulf Coast, who has been racking up the wins early this season. So if they continue to do that, uh, they'll certainly jump in here at some point. They play in a weaker conference, so they don't necessarily have as many of these prove it series coming up that we've been talking about with a lot of these teams. But if they continue to win games, and some of these teams are going to slip up, so we could see them jumping in here soon.
Yeah, they just need to like keep winning series, sweep a lot of teams, and eventually the wins will speak for themselves. They need to get a lot done to be able to jump into the rankings, but it would be a lot easier to stay in the rankings once they get there for them. Other teams like GCU also has faced pretty good competition overall. This week they just didn't really do the best. They went 3-1, but lost their midweek to Arizona, which was the only good competition they faced. And then another SEC team. It seems like we just can list off pretty much the entire SEC as a potential top 25 team. Auburn is 12-3-1. They went 3-2 on the week, so they definitely should not be losing a series to Southeast Louisiana. but they can definitely get back into the ranking conversation if they beat Arkansas this next week.
Yeah. One more team I would mention is Arizona. I think they've won 9 straight now. They have that win over Tennessee early in the season, and like you mentioned, just had that win over GCU in the midweek too. So they're starting to have some quality wins. They swept their first series of Pac-12 play, and I believe they are playing UCLA this upcoming weekend on the road. So if they win that, I think they're probably in the rankings. So definitely another team to keep an eye on there.
Yep, I'll add in another Pac 12 team there, Washington State. Obviously, we talked about it a lot, beating Oregon State at their own stadium, which was really impressive. And they hadn't faced anybody up until that point, but their record was good, similar to a lot of these teams at the back end of the top 25 that started near or in the top 25. It's just kind of a case for Washington State that they were on the other side of things, but they've kind of proved that they can rack up the wins and kind of get the job done against bad competition. So if they can kind of prove themselves a little bit more in Pac-12, then they definitely can hop on in pretty quickly. All right, let's run down the top 25 as of week 4. Starting at the 25 spot, we have Southern Miss 24, Oregon State 23, NC State 22, UC Santa Barbara 21, Campbell 20, South Carolina 19, TCU 18, North Carolina 17, Texas Tech 16, Florida State 15, Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech at 14, UCLA at 13, East Carolina at 12, Virginia at 11, Texas A&M at 10, Stanford at 9, Florida at 8, Vandy at 7, Louisville at 6, Ole Miss at 5, Tennessee at number 4, Arkansas at 3, Wake Forest at 2, and staying in that number 1 spot is LSU.